The story of Josef Mengele, the sinister Nazi doctor. Josef Mengele, a name synonymous with horror and cruelty. The man known as the Angel of Death operated in Auschwitz, conducting inhumane experiments on prisoners. How did a doctor descend into such barbarity? Today we retrace his story, uncovering his early years, his rise within the Nazi ranks, his horrifying experiments, and his escape from justice. His tale is one of ambition, scientific obsession, and the darkest depths of human cruelty. It all began in 1911, in a wealthy family in Günzburg, Germany. Josef Mengele grew up in comfort, shaped by a strict upbringing that emphasized discipline and obedience. His father, Karl Mengele, owned a prosperous manufacturing company, providing the family with influence and status. Josef was the eldest of 3 sons, expected to follow in his father's footsteps, but he had other ambitions. From an early age, he exhibited a sharp intellect and a fascination with human biology. At the University of Munich, he was introduced to eugenics, the pseudo-scientific theory advocating selective breeding to improve the human race. He joined the prestigious Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, where under the guidance of Ottmar von Verschuer, he became deeply entrenched in racial superiority doctrines. His research on genetic traits and inherited diseases laid the foundation for the horrors he would later commit. This period shaped his ideology, reinforcing the belief that science could be used to engineer a superior race. In 1937, Mengele officially aligned himself with the Nazi ideology by joining the Nazi Party. The following year, he enlisted in the SS, the paramilitary organization that enforced Hitler's reign of terror. Rising quickly through the ranks, Mengele's intelligence and ambition made him a valuable asset to the regime. By 1940, he was serving as a medical officer on the Eastern Front, earning the Iron Cross for bravery. However, his true calling lay not in the battlefield, but in the laboratories and camps where racial experiments were being conducted. In 1943, Mengele was assigned to Auschwitz, where he would leave his most indelible and horrifying mark on history. He arrived eager to prove himself, seeing Auschwitz not as a death camp, but as an opportunity, an open-air laboratory for his research on genetics, disease resistance, and racial purity. He was quickly promoted to the rank of chief physician of the Romani family camp, giving him unrestricted access to thousands of prisoners. Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of the Nazi concentration camps, became Mengele's playground of horror. His primary role was selection, standing at the train platforms as prisoners arrived, deciding with a flick of his hand who would be sent directly to the gas chambers and who would be kept for forced labor or his gruesome experiments. Witnesses recall how he conducted these selections with an air of detachment, sometimes even whistling classical music as he chose who would live and who would die. Twins became his primary obsession. He sought to uncover genetic secrets that could help the Nazis perfect the Aryan race. These children were housed separately, given extra food, and treated better than other prisoners, but only so they could be subjected to his brutal experiments. He injected them with toxic substances, attempted to alter their eye color, and performed amputations and surgeries without anesthesia. Many died from infections, organ failure, or sheer agony. Mengele would often stand over the dying children, taking meticulous notes before discarding their bodies like laboratory specimens. Pregnant women, people with physical deformities, and prisoners with unique traits were also used in his deadly research. Some victims were deliberately infected with diseases to study their progression, while others were subjected to extreme temperatures, starvation, or disfigurement. Mengele saw himself as a scientist, but history remembers him as a butcher. In 1945, as the Third Reich collapsed under the Allied advance, Mengele fled Auschwitz before Soviet troops arrived. Disguised as a regular soldier, he blended in among German troops retreating west. He was briefly captured by US forces, but due to a lack of records connecting him to war crimes at the time, he was released. From that moment on, Mengele became a ghost. Using false identities and the help of Nazi sympathizers, Mengele escaped to South America. He first settled in Argentina, where he lived under an assumed name and even worked as a doctor. But as Nazi hunters and intelligence agencies closed in, he moved to Paraguay and then Brazil. Each time the noose tightened, he vanished again, slipping through the cracks of international justice. By the 1960s, the world had not forgotten Mengele's crimes. The Israeli Mossad, fresh off capturing Adolf Eichmann in Argentina, turned their attention to Mengele. They came close to capturing him multiple times, but their leads were either too late or the Nazi networks protecting him were too strong. Germany, Israel, and other countries issued arrest warrants, but the South American governments he resided in often looked the other way. Mengele, despite being one of the most wanted war criminals, continued to live relatively undisturbed, working odd jobs and relying on wealthy Nazi supporters to sustain him. In 1979, Mengele's life ended not in a courtroom, but on a beach in Brazil. While swimming in the ocean, he suffered a stroke and drowned. His body was buried under a false name, and for years, his whereabouts remained uncertain. In 1985, forensic scientists exhumed his remains, and DNA tests confirmed what many had suspected. It was indeed Josef Mengele. He had escaped earthly justice, but his legacy as a symbol of Nazi cruelty remains forever etched in history. The story of Josef Mengele is more than just a dark chapter in history. It is a warning, a reminder that science, when weaponized by ideology and stripped of ethics, can become a tool for unimaginable horror. Mengele was never held accountable for his crimes, but his name has become a permanent scar on human history.